Concept assembly line, where ideas get to work. Too much is being made of the deficit impact on the recent legislation. Dick Cheney was right. Deficits don't matter, but capacity does. Not all spending creates inflation. That premise may seem counterintuitive in an era where every economic headline screams about deficits and debt, but it's grounded in a basic truth. Inflation arises not from how much we spend, but from what we spend on, who receives it, and how the economy absorbs it. The dominant narratives around inflation still treat it as a purely monetary phenomenon. More dollars equals more inflation. But this overlooks the real driver of sustained price increases: mismatches between demand and supply in specific sectors of the economy. To better evaluate the inflationary potential of large-scale policy proposals, Concept Assembly Line developed a predictive model that moves beyond budget scorekeeping and instead interrogates the structural interaction between spending, real resources, and future capacity. At the heart of the model is the idea that inflation is a constraint-based phenomenon. It emerges when new spending hits supply-side bottlenecks, not when governments merely print money. The model starts by calculating a demand shock, how much new economic activity a policy generates, adjusted by how fast that money circulates. Then it adjusts that shock by sectoral realities: how constrained are real resources? How easily can supply expand? Does the policy help build future productive capacity or merely consume what's already scarce? To answer these questions, the model relies on 5 key indicators, with the first 3 forming the methodological core. Real Resource Index, RRI, measures how much slack or constraint exists in the targeted sector. This is a composite of labor availability, capital input utilization, and regulatory flexibility. A high RRI, near 1.0, means the sector is maxed out. New demand likely just drives up prices. A low RRI near 0.0 suggests room to grow without inflation. Spending Velocity Multiplier, SVM, estimates how fast new money circulates through the economy. Direct transfers to lower-income households score high. Tax cuts for the wealthy score low. This determines how intense the initial demand shock is. Price Elasticity of Supply, PES, gauges how responsive supply is to rising demand. If supply can scale easily, say in cloud computing, PES is high. If it's rigid, like in housing or elder care, PES is low and inflation risk rises. Once these factors are combined, the model calculates how much of the new demand gets absorbed through real output versus how much spills over into price inflation. This is then moderated by 2 final elements: the Public Investment Multiplier, PIM, how much the policy expands productive capacity over time, and the External Pricing Risk Index, EPRI, which captures vulnerability to imported inflation through global trade dependencies or tariffs. To move beyond superficial measures of government spending, our model frames inflation as a problem of real-world constraints rather than abstract accounting. It integrates those 5 indicators into a functional framework. Estimate demand, shock. This tells us how much effective demand is added to the economy. Adjust for sectoral constraints. This calculates how much of that demand turns into price pressure based on supply elasticity and existing constraints. Offset with capacity investment. This reflects how much the policy improves the economy's ability to meet future demand without inflation. Each policy proposal thus yields a demand shock, initial economic pulse, a net inflation pressure score, short-term risk, a long-term resilience score, future inflation buffering effect. This lets us evaluate policy not just by its cost, but by its macroeconomic logic, how it interacts with the real economy, and whether it builds capacity or burns it. The Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, offers a clear example of low inflation, high resilience spending. With an annual outlay of roughly $80 billion, it focuses on clean energy investment, healthcare subsidies, and IRS enforcement. These funds are targeted at sectors with moderate to low real resource index scores. Renewable energy and tax administration both have untapped labor pools and scalable technology components. The capital constraints are manageable, and permitting, while imperfect, is steadily improving through federal coordination. The spending velocity multiplier is high, roughly 0.85, because most of the benefits go to working and middle-class households, clean energy producers, and public sector employees. These groups are more likely to spend funds quickly and domestically. The price elasticity of supply is also favorable. Solar, wind, and battery manufacturing have relatively high PES values thanks to flexible inputs, global sourcing options, and rapidly growing workforce pipelines. Even where short-term bottlenecks exist, such as grid interconnection delays, the policy includes funding to address them. Together, this produces a demand shock of $68 billion, but only $8.116 billion of that registers as inflationary pressure, a very modest, short-term risk. Meanwhile, the public investment multiplier is strong. Clean energy infrastructure, emissions-reducing technology, and tax enforcement all improve long-term efficiency and cost control. The IRA earns a resilience score of 75 on 100, meaning the policy meaningfully increases the economy's ability to absorb future demand without pushing up prices. By contrast, the Big Beautiful Bill, BBB, passed under the GOP with a $300 billion annual price tag, scores poorly on almost every vector of our model. The bulk of its funding goes to top-bracket tax cuts, increased defense spending, and broad-based tariffs on imports like electronics, textiles, and manufactured inputs. These sectors are already heavily constrained, and the proposed tariffs increase external pricing risk, pushing up consumer costs across the board. The real resource index for this proposal is high, around 0.9, because it targets sectors with limited capacity to scale quickly. Skilled labor is tight in defense manufacturing, and domestic substitutes for the imports affected by tariffs are not readily available. The spending velocity multiplier is low, just 0.6, because high-income households and corporations tend to save windfalls or invest them in financial markets rather than circulate them through the real economy. Meanwhile, the price elasticity of supply is dismal. Supply in defense, construction, and heavy manufacturing is slow-moving, capital-intensive, and deeply affected by global input prices. Despite generating a demand shock of $180 billion, the BBB produces a staggering $129.6 billion in net inflation pressure. That's because the demand is funneled into bottlenecked sectors with low PES and high RRI. Worse still, the public investment multiplier is weak. The bill includes almost no measures to expand long-term capacity, no energy investments, no infrastructure acceleration, no workforce development. Its resilience score comes in at just 20/100. The lesson from these two case studies is clear. Inflation isn't about how much you spend, it's about where that money goes and what it activates. The Inflation Reduction Act may have a smaller budget, but it targets sectors that are elastic, underutilized, and capable of long-term productivity gains. The Big Beautiful Bill spends more, but directs those funds into sectors already stretched to their limits, with minimal payoff in future economic resilience. This challenges the prevailing political framing that fiscal discipline means spending less. In reality, discipline means spending wisely, targeting demand where it can be met without inflation and building the supply where it can't. Inflation emerges when demand outpaces the economy's productive frontier. The solution isn't austerity, it's investment. When evaluating policy through this model, we must ask, does this proposal build our capacity to meet needs or burden our existing systems further? The Inflation Reduction Act builds. The big beautiful bill burdens. Spending isn't inherently inflationary, but misaligned spending is. A policy's true impact depends on how it moves money, where it lands, and what constraints it runs into. If we want to fight inflation intelligently, we need to stop counting dollars and start measuring real-world capacity. The future won't be won by those who cut the most, but by those who build the most wisely. This video is part of a broader project to reimagine public policy for real people. Grounded in modern monetary theory, committed to abundance over austerity, and focused on rebuilding the freedom infrastructure of everyday life. If my work resonates with you, share it. Subscribe on YouTube for more multi-format content. Together, we can reclaim what was once built and build it back better.